be, it looks like that would be a nice number to end with. This is 19. Next week will be double X. So, I mean, you just write how it goes. It just comes out, and then, oh, that's too many words. Oh, I can do that next week. That's kind of the way that's been working. Very interesting note. Sometimes you do an audible, and there's one this morning. Everybody thinks about the chaos of life. We're starting that in Sunday school. Love in chaos. And life can be chaotic sometimes. It just can. It's just part of the deal. And but it's been really since Adam and Eve messed up. It's been a long time, so it's not like it just happened here in the last few years. It's been a long, long time. And so we live in that, and that's the space we live in. And there's a lot of choice on how we walk through it. You know, a lot of people can go through some of the same chaos, and you look at them and they're just, how come they're not as bothered or upset or worried as I am? It's an amazing thing to be able to trust God in life and to turn over and surrender a lot of stuff that you don't actually have to carry while still living in some of the same chaos. So I thought this was an interesting story out of the New York Post. It's probably in a lot of different newspapers, but the headline says this, and you think about all this stuff that happens to Job and whatnot, or in your own life. Entire New Jersey town without without power after bizarre animal falls from the sky and destroys the transformer in the town. Yeah, you probably have heard of it. You guys watch weird news stories. So, it's playing the video. Don't mean to do that. A fish dropped out of the sky by its bird captor, and it caused a power outage for a section of homes in New Jersey town. How's that kind of stuff happen, really? Seriously. You just think that just God allows boils on a guy, and then you just have like a fish that drops on. There's a large area of lower Sayreville without power. They're reporting that they found a fish on top of the transformer. The fish destroyed the transformer, and there was about 3,000 people, a 30-mile radius south of New York City, on the Raritan Bay and Raritan River. And this there was a bird drop that dropped a fish. So like when stuff happens, like when your washing machine goes out or your refrigerator goes out, hey, stuff happens. I mean, it just happens in this life. And you can just be able to go, well, why does it happen to me? And I don't know that you're anything special, that stuff would happen to you that it doesn't happen to a lot of people, and you just can't explain it. And there's people, they get into these things, we call them accidents, crashes, but just stuff happens in this life. And so that it kind of just sets in motion this idea of this story of Job really teaches a lot about how we walk through stuff, how we handle it, looking at the interactions of Job and how he views God, and then how he responds to these companions and his wife and all these other things before God speaks. It's a really amazing story. So we're entering, I think, I will call it the home stretch of Job. It's amazing. Never thought I'd see this. So anyway, so we see several layers at the end of the story of Job, and there is praying for his friends. It's amazing. Being restored, the strength of community, stuff being restored, family being restored, and given a long, full life for Job. It's seemingly a very happy ending. Anyway, yeah, you need to turn around. I think that's what they're saying about here. It's all good. Anyway, this is the things that makes movies great. It makes movies great. Now, speaking of movies, here's a list of things that you normally see in just about any movie. For those of you that are movie heads, you know what I'm talking about. All grocery bags contain at least one loaf of French bread unwrapped sticking out of a grocery bag. It's fairly easy for anyone to land a plane as long as there's someone in the control tower to help you talk you down safely. Should you wish to pass yourself off as a German officer, it will not be necessary to speak German. As long as you have a German accent, that will do. A man will show no pain while taking the most ferocious beating, but will wince when a woman is trying to take care of and cleanse a wound. A reminder, in case you just joined us, these are things that normally you can see in just about any movie. When paying for a taxi, don't worry about the right change. Whatever you pull out of your wallet at that particular time will be enough to cover the fare. Cars that crash eventually will catch on flames. A single match will be sufficient to light up any room, even in a dark cave. Even when driving down a perfectly straight road, it is necessary to turn the steering wheel vigorously from left to right every once in a while. All bombs are fitted with this nice electronic timing device with large red readout letters so you know that when it's going to go off. A detective can only solve a case once he has been suspended from duty. It does not matter if you are heavily outnumbered in a fight involving martial arts. Your enemies will wait patiently to attack you one by one while dancing around in a threatening manner until you have knocked out the ones before they approach. Television news bulletins usually contain a story that affects you personally at that precise moment. And last, just because that's about all we can handle of this, you can always rely on your car keys already being in the ignition when you need to drive in a car in emergency. Now, it may not start right away just so the tense of music can build up, but it will eventually start. So the ending of Job has this kind of storybook movie ending. It's really just, I mean, you read through the trenches of it during it, and you're just like, man, I don't want to read this anymore. This is just brutal. His friends and everything. Just so, why would I want to just continue to read this and get this on me? But this ending is such a few short verses, especially when you start off at the beginning of the ending, knowing the epilogue. It's just called the epilogue. It's a headline. At the end of the book, it's the end of a play. Sometimes an epilogue is. And really what that means, it's bringing things to a conclusion in this story. So first thing we're going to look at is that God rebukes Job's friends as God uses Job to forgive them. It's an amazing story here, how this ends. We're in 42. It's the last chapter. We're going to look at verses 7 through 9, these three verses. After the Lord had said these things to Job, he said to Eliphaz the Temanite, I'm angry with you and your two friends, because you have not spoken of me of what is right, as my servant Job has. So now take 7 bulls and 7 rams and go to my servant Job and sacrifice a burnt offering for yourselves. My servant Job will pray for you, and I will accept his prayer and not deal with you according to your folly. You have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has. Sometimes So after God has spoken with Job about all these things, the Lord shows Job, and then after this, Job repents. The Lord now turns to Eliphaz the Temanite. God tells Eliphaz that he's angry with him and his two friends. So why? It's because he hasn't spoken right about him. He's spoken incorrectly. And so when you think about all that Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar have said to Job, they have referenced some very wrong things theologically on their view of God, how they've answered Job, not being loving and being very critical. Eliphaz is even rebuked severely by God. So little did Eliphaz know that he himself had prophesied this particular result. If you go back to Job 22 in the text, Job 22 verses 29 through 30, it says this: when men are brought low, Eliphaz is saying this. These are Eliphaz's words. When men are brought low, Job, and say, lift them up, then he will save the downcast. He will deliver even one who is not innocent, who will be delivered through the cleanness of your hands. It's pretty eerie that Eliphaz would have said that, and then it actually happens to him. And on top of that, it comes as a result of Job before he is restored with his animals, family, and his wealth. At this point, Job is still in ashes, probably still suffering from boils from head to toe. And at that particular point, after all these conversations, he is asked to bless Eliphaz and these friends. It's an amazing moment. When you really read the entirety of this and everything that they have said back to him, that God calls them for them to go to Job, to sacrifice this way, and for him to bless them and to pray for them. I find it amazing, especially when you're still suffering. These friends are to take 7 bulls, and 7 rams and go to Job to sacrifice these animals for themselves. It's a pretty hefty sacrifice. I'm thinking you probably need a cart because the internal combustion engine wasn't developed yet. So you probably need some kind of device because 3 guys are not carrying that kind of load of animals. That's a total of 14 animals, 7 of them bulls. So I don't think it's a small feat. And remember, this is all before the temple was built. This is all before the law of Moses was given. And so this is a very interesting thing that God tells them to bring these animals to Job. Job is, in effect, acting as a priest would. He does so in chapter 1. Remember that when he says he offered up sacrifices for his children? I just wanted to make sure that they were covered. And God tells the friends to take these 14 animals to sacrifice them before Job. And God tells them that Job will pray for them and not deal with you according to your folly. It's almost like Job's going to take care of this, because if you had to deal with me, I'd just thump you guys. God said that he would accept Job's prayer. But because of their foolish thought regarding God, God told them that you have not spoken of me of what is correct. For all the things that they said, God ended up saying, here's the bottom line, you've not spoken about me correctly. You have dishonored me by the way that you've talked about me. But my servant Job has. So Job is elevated by God, and the friends are rebuked by God, and now they have to face Job humbly. Again, this scene is an amazing thing because you don't get it really spelled out. You just, here's the processes of what's going to happen, but you don't see this interaction, the emotion side of it, the interaction between humans at that level. So there's 2 things of note. One is that there is this picture, and the text doesn't say this. So I'm saying this for illustration purposes. I want to really make sure that what I say is really clear on this. This is not what the text says. But you see this picture of Jesus suffering, taking punishment, taking the pain, and Jesus being exalted. And because of his stripes, we are healed. You get this early picture of what that looks like. Illustration only. The text isn't saying that. But I see this illustration rather than implying that this is what it's saying. The innocent one suffers for the sake of the guilty being forgiven. You kind of see that picture? Job suffers terribly as an innocent man. His friends are cruel, they're judgmental, and they're wrong. They now have to go to Job to sacrifice. The one they've mocked, the one they've ridiculed, and the one that they've judged. So there's just some interesting similarities in here. Don't want to make it more than what it is, more than just being an illustration. So we see this picture of the suffering servant, one who is afflicted by God. The second thing, and this is heavy for me personally, is I notice this notion of God saying to Eliphaz, you have spoken of me not spoken of me what is right. So speaking personally, I sense and feel an incredible weight of responsibility to represent God. Words mean things, and this thing gets recorded to everybody who wants to watch, all 3 of them, whoever watches this stuff. But it's a heavy idea of speaking for God and to make sure that you don't dishonor him or say something stupid or something in a way that just leads people astray. It's a heavy thing. It's a very heavy thing. And so to not take it lightly, but also to know that there is this weight. And truly, I don't want to give anybody a wrong picture of who God is and what he does and his power. I want him exalted more than anything else. And it's tough because when you have humans doing this, we have a tendency to be human. So we are all raised with our predispositions because of the families that we were raised in, the denominations that we were raised in, the preachers, the teachers, the authors, and mentors that have spoken into our lives and influenced us all. So we all come in with this particular of, here's what I think, here's what I know, here's what I've been raised with. And you can also say, here's how I read the text. And I think it's a heavy thing, this responsibility as ambassadors of the gospel of Jesus. Jesus' words are clear when he gives the 7 woes and the rebukes to the teachers of the law and the Pharisees. Two particular texts I want to highlight. Matthew 23:13. Woe to you, teachers of the law, Jesus says, And Pharisees, you hypocrites, you travel over land and sea to win a single convert, and when you have succeeded, you have made them twice as much a child of hell as you are. Oh, man, that's a serious smack. And then in Luke 17, Jesus says to his disciples in verses 1 through 2, things that cause people to stumble are bound to come, but woe to anyone through whom they come. That's heavy. It would be better for them to be thrown into the sea with a millstone tied around their neck than to cause one of these little ones to stumble. It is really a big deal to speak correctly for God. It's just heavy, that's all. Okay. Oh, thank you. I wasn't looking for that, but thank you very much. So the friends, they go to Job with their sacrifices. Now, G. Campbell Morgan wrote this in his commentary on the whole Bible. He said they, Job's friends, had attempted to restore Job by philosophy, and they had failed. This is Morgan's quote. He was now to restore them by prayer. The bonds of his own captivity were broken. Moreover, the activity of prayer on the behalf of others is what is highlighted here at the very end. End quote. Remember that Job still has boils while he's praying for his friends who he has had this contention with now. I think it's a humbling thing to do for your friends. But it's also humbling to be in Job's position at this particular juncture to pray for your friends. You know how sometimes it's easy, even as Christians, to carry something like a grudge or something in your spirit where you're just going, I know you're talking nicely to me. I really don't feel like talking nicely back. And you have this inside of you. And you know, not just intellectually, but spiritually go, I'm out of line. I'm listening to somebody that I really need to be kind to and show love to, but yet in my spirit, I've got this angst, this frustration, this judgment. Job has just been with God. I think that there has been a lot of grace shown to him. And when you understand how much grace has been given to you, you can then allow yourself, because you've seen it, because you don't deserve it. And then you are able to go, I understand God's grace so much, I have to be a purveyor of this beautiful grace that God's given to me, because I deserve a kick in the pants. And if I treat other people the way that I think they should be treated, then how should God treat me? Really? So, Charles Spurgeon wrote this: Job was permitted to take a noble revenge. Those two words usually don't go together. A noble revenge. I am sure the only one he desired when he became the means of bringing them back to God. He continues on. God would not hear them, he said, for they had spoken so wrongly of his servant Job, and now Job is set to be a mediator or an intercessor on their behalf. Thus was the contempt poured upon the patriarch turned into honor. Job could not have imagined this particular ending to this particular story. I mean, can you? I mean, sometimes you go through your stuff and you go for months or years into a story and you see the ending and you go, I would have never thought that God would have put me in this position, that I would have been in this, because I did a lot of kicking and screaming all the way along this journey, and now I'm put into position to be humble and to actually serve and to love and to give, and you're just like, I don't even deserve to be able to love, give, and humble. I mean, these are incredible times, and I think this is so relatable to us. It is so relatable. Job could have never imagined writing this into his story. Hearing from God, his hostile friends coming to him to offer sacrifices to God, for Job to get the opportunity now to pray for them. You can't pray for someone if you've got grudge against them. And you can't pray well. You just can't do that. You can't intercede on someone's behalf if you've got something against them. It's hard. Now, you can't do it well. So this is a very cool scene playing out, the grace of God being put fully on display. So, I mean, I hope I would know the answer, but don't you appreciate God's grace? Are we amazed at the grace that God has given us when we know really, truly what we deserve? I think it's unlike the story of Craddock's stories. I think I got the picture cover of Craddock on here. Anyway, Fred Craddock wrote the Craddock stories. And It is the following account of one who could understand law, but he could not understand grace. You know folks like that in Scripture. Hopefully you don't know anybody like that in yourself. But anyway, Craddock preached in Blue Ridge, Georgia. By the way, for those of you that remember Joel Chastain, he challenged us on that Super Bowl Sunday and all that. Joel was from Georgia. He's living in Blue Ridge right now. Anyway, he was with us. It's been 2 years since he's been gone. Anyway, I think about him when I think of Blue Ridge. Craddock preached in Blue Ridge, Georgia one Sunday while the pastor was away, and he preached on the text of the prodigal son. And after the service, a man said, "I really didn't care much for that, frankly." He asked the man why. The man said he didn't like the story because it was morally irresponsible. Craddock said, "What do you mean by that?" "Well, forgiving the boy," the man said. Craddock asked him, "Well, what would you have done?" "Well, I think when he came home, he should have been arrested," answered the man. Craddock writes, "This fellow was serious. He's an attorney. I thought, well, maybe he was telling me a joke. But he was really serious. He belonged to this unofficial organization nationwide, never has any meetings and doesn't have a name, but it's a very strong network that they call quality control people. Anyway, they're moral police, mandatory sentences, no parole, mind you, and we need to include executions." Craddock then asked, "Well, what would you have done to the prodigal?" And he said, "I'd give him 6 years. And verse 9 answers this way: the Lord accepted Job's prayer. Job prays for his friends, and they had acted wickedly, accused Job of great sin, and they wrongfully judged him. Secondly, Job is blessed, restored, and he's received by community. If you look at the verses in 10 through 11, look at this. After Job had prayed for his friends, notice that sentence right there. After Job prayed for his friends, the Lord made him prosperous again and gave him twice as much as he had before. All his brothers and sisters and everyone who had known him before came and ate with him in his house. They comforted and consoled him over all the trouble the Lord had brought upon him, and each one gave him a piece of silver and a gold ring. Now, again, this takes place after he's prayed for his friends. The NIV says that the Lord made Job prosperous again and gave him twice as much as he had before. Almost every translation I looked up, which was probably about 24, said the Lord restored Job's losses. There's only 2 translations that capture the Hebrew, and I had to go back to Hebrew on this one because I wonder, where does King James get this and Young's literal translation get this? They both say, and the Lord turned the captivity of Job. Very interesting phrasing. Everybody else says restore, but return the captivity. The actual Hebrew reads this. I had to look this one up several times because it didn't look right. When you see something that has 2 words right back to back, the actual Hebrew reads, and the Lord turned the captivity of Job. Captivity of. It's actually in there twice, the word captivity of, when he prayed for his friends. The captivity of is actually 2 times in a row in Hebrews. It never really gets translated in any of those 2 translations twice. So the reason is, I don't know. That's why. I have no idea. But this is an ancient phrase, and our modern phrasing would be restored. That's the way we would see it. But the understanding of this common ancient word understood, and this is really cool, the heaviness of what you came from. Now, we get a little picture of this in the Exodus, remembering the 10 plagues, remembering the suffering for hundreds of years of our people, that we were slaves, we were treated harshly. We remember the bitterness, the bitter root of eating that. We remember. And so this idea of being a Christian, I was lost, and now I'm found. I was blind, and now I see. I was dead, and now I'm alive. Sometimes we forget where we came from. What are you saved from? Well, I've always been. Like, The idea of remembering where you came from is a huge deal, and that's the understanding of this Hebrew context of coming out of the captivity of, this idea of captivity of, is remembering that. And we just like to look at the restored, because the restored part is the fun part of this text. Hey, he got it all back 2 times. Yeah. So I think that we get this when we really look back on our lives, when we understand grace, when we understand that we don't deserve heaven, we don't deserve the presence of God, we don't deserve his perfect word, we don't deserve the Holy Spirit in our lives, we don't deserve being judged as if we have not sinned. We don't deserve any of that. And when we understand how beautiful God's grace is, then it gets elevated to its proper perspective to go, I mean, you start thinking, sometimes it's easy to think, well, because I'm good and I do good things, and whoa. That's what the Galatians got kicked for that one too, okay? So the idea that we'd have anything to do with this loving grace that God has given through us, to us through his death on the cross to bring us new life and resurrection, the fact that we are undeserving. The next part of this text is where there's this emotional divisive response. Verse 10b says this: the Lord made him prosperous again and gave him twice as much as he had before. Now, there is a real divisive understanding on this particular thing. Not that they don't believe it. The division is how we respond to it. That's the interesting thing. There are some who love this happy, cheery ending from such a riches to rags to riches story again. They love the fact at the end of the story, the antagonist goes away after the conflict and doesn't even get mentioned. And yet there's another side that says Job's example here isn't all our story's examples. Because there are people that go, well, where's my ending? So they look at Job going, what made him special? There's actually these 2 camps that really like this ending. And there's others that go, yeah, that's maybe good for Job, but I don't see any twice as much happening to me. And they look at this physical part here and can get agitated. Why? Because you look at your own circumstances and then you make judgments based upon my circumstances. Job gets twice as much, so where is my happiness going to come, and do I stay in suffering and sorrow? And the real answer here, that's the only way I can say it, it's not really sounds theological or smart. God can do whatever he wants to do. I mean, that one I can land on without sounding too over-intellectual. I mean, he can end up with Joseph being second to Pharaoh and restoring the Jews' proliferation. He can actually have Peter crucified upside down. God can end the story of Samson in a pagan temple being crushed down on him after he went blind. Or he can go to Rome like Paul and get his head chopped off. God gets to do whatever he wants to with your story. And for us to think that every story has to end just like Job just because we have an understanding of what happens in the middle, our real restoration isn't truly here. Our real restoration is eternity with him. And that was done on the cross, and we actually have that. It's guaranteed. It's promised. So, can I just say that all of our endings of our stories here on this planet are not the same? They're just not. They're not equal. And the comparison of, we do this. We do that. I mean, it's in the Bible. Jeremiah complained about it. These people, they do all kinds of sin. They're all wrong. And look, they don't ever get punished. And remember Jeremiah saying this all the time? And they get rewarded. And God doesn't. God, where are you? Where's your justice? And yet here we are serving you, and we're wearing handcuffs and in jail. So what's going on, God? Where are you at? I mean, it's kind of that looking at these difference of how our stories are and going, God's still the same. He's still the same in every single story. And God gets to decide what he wants to do for his greater purposes. And when we understand that it's for him, our whole lives, and any wealth that you have, I mean, remember the story with the Israelites. Hey, don't ever think that when you get to the promised land that you guys actually grew this stuff, that you actually conquered your enemies because you're so tough. I mean, just remember, it was the Lord who gave this stuff to you. Just remember that, because there will be times of leanness. There might be 7 years of famine. There might be times where it's just really, really hard. But again, how much are you going to trust me? And so God decides what he wants to do. And you hear these stories of people who have, I just mentioned this, these people who have died and gone to heaven. I mean, some of them have written books. I don't know, maybe they get like that or something, and they come back and they go like, so what's the trade-off? You were in heaven in the presence of Jesus, and you got to come back here. So when you think about this story of Job, having all this stuff, and being in such great suffering and isolation and separation from anybody who gets it, and then being restored after he was in the presence of God and watched his power and his majesty and was allowed to humbly pray for his friends and accept their sacrifices, going, oh, I got twice as much of that? I've been with God. You see the difference in perspective at that point? Because if you're a normal, average, well, let's even say Christian American, you have this idea of going, he got twice as much because why? He was obedient. I'm going to do that. And see, because we'll do anybody's plan who took this powder and this shake and they lost 70 pounds in 2 weeks. We'll go, oh, look at these pictures. I'm into that. Definitely. Because it's happened to somebody else. And you go, well, I drank 3 canisters of that and it didn't happen for me. So when we look at this story of Job, it's really interesting to think about if you were in that perspective and you were in the presence of God and you saw him display so many great works, and then he gives you this stuff and you're going, in comparison, I was just in the presence of the living God. He was showing me so many great things and I've been so overwhelmed. I thought I knew about God and now I've seen him. Oh, thanks for the cash. You see the difference in how that feels? When we look at it from what we consider our own poverty level, and when we have this internal, well, because remember, I don't know, it's all running together now. I don't know, it was last week or 2 weeks ago that I said giants look big because of our own perspective, of our own judgment, of our own place. And so when we look at this, man, he got double, and then I look at my perspective, there ain't no doubling happening now. And we just say, we end up doing this. It's an internal thing, and most of us will not say it, but we'll say, well, what about me? You can turn any Bible story into a what about me. You just can. And so I find this just fascinating that all of a sudden he gets this stuff back, and I just would wonder, going, well, thanks, God. Now what am I going to do with this? I've just been with you. I've got everything I need. I am completely satisfied. And I'm just wondering, because he did give him long years, that God wasn't done with him yet, I assume, on what God was going to do through Job with his story and with his stuff. And that the end user, and I say this a lot, I repeat myself, the end user was not Job. It never was about Job. It was always about God. He just witnessed God speaking, showing him power, the majesty of God. And I just wonder if this money had any relevance at all. So look at verse 11 again. All his brothers and sisters and everyone who had known him before came and ate with him in his house. They comforted and consoled him over all the trouble the Lord had brought upon him. And each one gave him a piece of silver and a gold ring. You know, I think about this like at funerals and stuff, you know, where you have, you know, one of the things they train you in Bible college is this: if you really want to be really a good consoler, shut up, don't use any words. I mean, it's pretty much the more words you use, the more you're going to really mess things up, right? And so to be able to be what? Present. To be able to love people. And this is what these friends do, these acquaintances, these brothers and sisters. Everyone who had known him before is now eating with him and consoling him for all the troubles that he had walked through. And it's interesting line here. It says, over all the trouble the Lord had brought upon him. And each one gave him, a token. This wasn't about just restoring. This was saying, hey, I just love you. And we do that with gift cards. We do it with nice greeting cards. And we'll just do it because we love someone. We'll buy somebody's lunch. We'll just love someone and just say, I care about you. I want to be with you. And it doesn't break the bank. It doesn't mean all of a sudden we're wealthy, but we're wealthy in ways when people do that for us, that we have been loved on, whether it has money involved or not, that we have been cared for. And that's what happened. And you think about a bigger restoration than twice the wealth is to have all these people come and eat at your house. I was disdained. Who wants to be around a guy covered with boils? It's just nasty. Scraping them with pieces of clay, setting in ashes. You're just a nasty individual to be around. And what can we say? There's nothing to say. And now they get to console him. Now, brothers and sisters and everyone who knew Job came and they ate with him. And none of that was going to replace wealth, but they just wanted to bless him. Now, you can do some judgments if you want and say, well, they're fair with their friends. Who knows? I don't know. But this is what real restoration looks like. So not come around and go, well, where were you guys like when I was sitting in at? It's none of that. It's where they're at now. You don't condemn people who come alongside and just forget about it. They're just like, thank you for being here. It doesn't matter what's happened in the past, because that's what forgiveness is. When you've been shown grace, you understand grace. So I believe real restoration is found in relationships, especially in a God who is a relational God. Job was loved by God, and he was taken care of by him the entire time. And now all these folks loving on Job after he's been in such pain and isolation. And I think that's when you really look at true riches. Job was a blameless servant before. So what do we think about Job after this? The experience of suffering, and then the experience, this encounter with God. Now, we hear commercials all the time by people like Beavis and Barney. With a Kentucky accent, he goes, if you've ever been hurt or injured in an accident, you can call us, and you know this phrase, we will make you whole. We will make you whole. Meaning, we'll get you some money. Now, that's a slice. That's kind of what happened here with Job. He got a slice. A slice of that was wealth. But what God restored in Job was a real whole. The wholeality of God loves him. He's there. He's present. That his friends come alongside of him to console him. That he is restored in relationships and understands God in a deeper place. That is something that no lawsuit will ever recover, that kind of wholeness. And even if you do get some cash in that kind of format, you know that you cannot receive wholeness just from that slice. You know you can't. It may pay for things, but this happens here. It happens in your heart to be able to know that God's in control and he loves you. And no matter what, those kind of things happen, you know that God's got this. And so God is in the business of restoring our hearts. He did it with Job, and it was greater than any judgment that could have been awarded in court. I'll just close with this lyrics of this song. I just really liked it. It says, it's a song called My Worth Is Not in What I Own. It's by Keith and Kristen Getty. My worth is not in what I own, not in the strength of flesh and bone, but in the costly wounds of love at the cross. My worth is not in skill or name, in win or lose, in pride or shame, but in the blood of Christ that flowed at the cross. As summer flowers we fade and die, fame, youth, and beauty hurry by, but the life eternal calls to us at the cross. I will not boast in wealth or might, or human wisdom's fleeting light, but I will boast in knowing Christ at the cross. Two wonders here that I confess, my worth and my unworthiness. My value fixed, my ransom paid at the cross. I rejoice in my Redeemer, greatest treasure, wellspring of my soul, and I will trust in him, no other. My soul is satisfied in him alone. My soul is satisfied in him alone. And when you live like that, you understand what it is to be made whole. When you've completely surrendered to him and know that he's got it all, no matter what this looks like here, there is a peace that passes all understanding, one that will guard your heart and your mind. And that's the promise that he gives. That's the hope that he gives. And here's the deal. It's free. Completely free. The only cost? The giving up of yourself. That's it. But it's free. Exchange for the way that you do things and worry about things, or surrendering it back to God. It's a completely different dynamic. If you don't know the Lord Jesus today, you're welcome to come forward. We'll pray with you, talk with you about that. If you need prayer for anything, need to repent, whatever it is you need, you're welcome to come forward as we stand up and as we sing.